Welcome to the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Jarvis Escott with What's Happening Birmingham. Today, I have the honor and pleasure of being with Dr. Paul Goepfert. He is a great physician doctor here at the Alabama Vaccine Research Clinic at University of Alabama at Birmingham. Dr. Goepfert, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. Reason why I want to bring the doctor on, continuing talking about COVID-19, I want to bring on the actual experts and the people that's in the field trying to make a change and trying to find a vaccine to get rid of this disease that we got right now. Dr. Goepfert has been very influential in this, that actually, and I was looking you up a little bit, you are one of the NIH-sponsored global clinical trial universities picked about the vaccine.
Yeah, we ran some, we've helped enroll some participants to test these vaccines. The main one is the Janssen vaccine. And then we also helped with the Sanofi vaccine product as well.
Okay, so brought the doctor on and asked him to get in the weeds a little bit today, because we know the vaccine is out here, but a lot of people have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns about possibly taking it. So the first question I have to ask you is, how well does the COVID-19 vaccines prevent the disease?
So there are two vaccines now that are FDA approved under what's called an emergency use authorization. That's the vaccine from Pfizer and another vaccine from Moderna. And those two vaccines are very similar. They're mRNA vaccines. And they both showed in two separate studies, enrolling over 70,000 people in those studies, they showed that the vaccines are 95% effective in preventing COVID disease. Okay, so highly effective. In fact, for an adult vaccine, it's probably the most effective vaccine that's ever been developed for adults.
Oh, wow. And how actually does this vaccine provide protection? How does it, I guess?
That's a really good question. Vaccines work all around the same principle. And what they do is we pick out one part of the virus. So COVID has a virus that is made up of about 30 different pieces. We take one of those pieces, which is the surface protein, or called the spike protein, the S protein, and we present that to the immune system. And so then what happens is that your body looks at this thing and says, hey, this isn't normal. I need to get my buddies here to look at this. And those buddies are what are called B cells and T cells. And they say, you're right, this isn't normal. I'm going to grow and make an army of stuff so we can fight against this. So what the vaccine does is it just gives you a signature part of the virus. And then later on, if somebody were to get infected with COVID, then the immune system can rapidly recognize it as a foreign invader and destroy it. So that's how the immune system works. And how do we figure out what is sort of the signature part of the virus to use as a vaccine? The way I like to put it is, it's sort of like, if you show me your keychain of what car you drive, I can usually tell you the make of the car that you drive if you just show me your keychain. So for instance, if you drive a Mazda, there's a signature emblem that your keychain has on it. And then I can know that if the Mazda comes up, the actual Mazda car, that is the Mazda. And I know that from your keychain. And that's what we do with the immune system. Now, notably with that keychain, you can't do anything else in terms of car-wise, right? You can't go drive 70 miles an hour on the highway. You can't go kill yourself in an auto accident. So it's much more safe than the actual car, but you can still recognize it and use it to actually inform your body's immune system to recognize and kill a potential pathogen or a potential virus.
All right, so how effective is it like reducing the severity of it once you get the vaccine when it comes to the COVID-19?
So the way the study was done, the two studies were done, the way all these studies have been done is their endpoint, what they look at is how effective is it in reducing symptomatic COVID infection. So let's say you're in the study, you don't know, and the way these studies are done, half get the vaccine, half got placebo, and you don't know what you got, but all of a sudden you start having symptoms of COVID. So you have a runny nose, you lose your sense of smell, you get a cough. So then you go get tested, and then you get diagnosed with COVID. That goes into a database, and at the end of the study, what they do is they hope that the people who got the vaccine have less of those episodes than the people who didn't get the vaccine, and that was indeed the case at a 95% effective level. Okay, so, but that's just, that can be any COVID thing. Now, if you're talking about really severe disease, there was, again, there was only, in the Pfizer and in the Moderna study, there was only one person who got the vaccine who got infected and had a severe disease, and that was in the Pfizer vaccine. In all the other cases, they were all in the placebo. So all the other severe cases, which I think was 40 cases, were all in the placebo arm. So the ones who didn't get the vaccine. So it's highly effective in protecting against severe disease.
Okay, and I want you to kind of go back a minute ago as far as the study. And you said it was one of like, what was about this particular study and developing the vaccine, how you all was able to develop this so quickly?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it all started, first of all, it started even before COVID was upon us, because as many people know, there was another coronavirus called SARS-1.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was a big problem in the world. It wasn't a huge problem in that it didn't infect a bunch of people, but what it was, they were worried it was going to infect a bunch of people. And the mortality rate of SARS-1 was like 30%. So 30% of people who got SARS-1 died. But fortunately for the world, you didn't transmit SARS-1 until you got sick. And so we could isolate the people who got sick and it wouldn't transmit. When research at that time was done in animal models, and it showed that the spike protein of SARS-1 was the Achilles heel of the virus. And so if you could use that as your vaccine, the spike protein, it would likely work. Although the human studies were never started because it was the virus was gone now from the human population. So when COVID was first discovered to be a problem in China, scientists already thought, well, if we're going to make a vaccine, we already know what to make it out of. We know that we're going to target this spike protein. So that already put them years ahead right there, or at least months ahead, that they knew what part of the virus to target. That was the first thing. The second thing is this mRNA vaccine. This is completely novel technology. It's never been used before to make a vaccine in the clinic.
Okay.
And so, and the reason this is so, this helps it make it faster is because RNA is much easier to make a vaccine that's an RNA vaccine. So this is just, RNA is basically a blueprint to make the protein. And so what they did was the virus was known, it was sequenced, they got the genetic code of the virus, the Chinese did, and they let that out in the public domain for the rest of the world to know. And within a week, they started making a vaccine. And that's something that normally takes months to do, sometimes years, to actually make the vaccine, but they did it within a week. And then they started trials, they tested it in animals to make sure it was safe, it wasn't toxic, and that was fine. And then they started human trials in March. And some of the trial design was innovative as well, because what they did is they combined different phases of the trial so you wouldn't have to be held up by some regulatory issues. And then they went quickly into phase 3, which is the efficacy study. And then the reason that went fast as well is because people were very engaged. You had a lot of volunteers who really wanted a vaccine. And so you had 30,000 people volunteer and enroll extremely rapidly, which generally doesn't happen. Most vaccine trials enroll much, much more slowly. But a lot of people really wanted to help with this, to find the vaccine. And then finally, the other reason that we were able to find it so quickly is a sad reason, and that's because we continue to have a huge amount of infections in the United States. When you have continued infections, that's how you can determine whether the vaccine works or not. If you have no infections at all, you can't even test the vaccine, which is why we couldn't test it for SARS-1. But the fact that we not only had infections in the US, but a huge number of infections, it allowed us to get the answer much more quickly than we normally would get. So for all those reasons, we were able to develop this vaccine very rapidly. And note that I didn't say anything about skimping on safety. We still have data, safety data on over 30,000 individuals that were vaccinated. So we know this vaccine is safe in those numbers. The big problem with that, though, is that it's 30,000 people, not a billion people that you want to vaccinate in the world, or more than a billion. So when you start vaccinating millions of people, you may start seeing side effects that are much more rare that you won't see in that smaller number. And in fact, what we're seeing now is possibly higher rates of anaphylaxis with these mRNA vaccines, even though those rates are still about 1 to 5 in a million individuals. I cut out again, didn't I? Sorry.
You're back.
Okay.
One of the miracles of TV. It's all Zoom. I think people love it when I keep this in there.
I don't know why it keeps doing that. Yeah.
We're doing good. Plus, doing good information. So that leads me to my next question. So, a lot of these new variants that's out there, how effective are they when it comes in contact with the vaccine? Do you think the vaccine's going to work against the variants?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
So the variant in the United Kingdom, it depends what kind of variant. That one seems to be sensitive to the vaccine, and that was published recently. Or they have these preprint publications before it's even peer-reviewed. But it looks like the vaccine works against that one, the one in the United Kingdom. That one the mutation makes it much more infectious, but it doesn't get away from the vaccine responses. However, there's one variant now that's circulating in South Africa that may be somewhat resistant to the vaccine. We just don't know yet. My impression is that this virus will mutate and eventually become resistant to the vaccine, but that's going to take time. And in that time, we will hopefully have another vaccine, or maybe even better, we'll have a control of the infection. But we have the tools now to be able to stay ahead of the virus in that sense.
So the next question, I'm thinking, I know you hear this a lot. Can people who already had COVID-19, can they get the vaccine, or do they have to have a waiting period before they can get it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So people who've been infected with COVID, we know now that they are highly protected against another infection. It's not complete protection, but they're protected. But that protection likely doesn't last that long. So it is recommended that they get a vaccine, but it's also recommended that if you get COVID infection, you wait at least 3 months before you start getting your vaccine. And the reason for that is it's highly unlikely you're going to get infected within that 3 months or reinfected. And also, you may have more side effects if you take the vaccine in that short period of time. And then finally, you're freeing up a vaccine dose for somebody else who has no immunity to it at all, which is helpful. But the short answer is yes, they need to get vaccinated to provide more long-lasting protection, but they need to wait, or it's recommended that they wait at least 3 months before that happens.
Okay, and before I go any further, what are the actual side effects have been of some of these vaccines so far?
So the most common side effect is pain in the arm, pain and tenderness. And about 90%, so 9 out of 10 people will have pain or tenderness in the arm. And that will occur after the first dose and the second dose. That goes away in 24 to 48 hours. And then the other side effects are what are called systemic side effects. So these are side effects that are throughout the body. They include things like headache and fatigue. Those are the most common. And they occur in up to 2/3 to 3/4 of individuals. So 60 to 75% of people will have these things, particularly after the second dose. And again, they can also have aches and pains in their muscles and joints. That's more like 40% of individuals. Some people can actually have a fever. That's about 10%. But luckily, all these side effects go away within 24 hours to 48 hours at the longest. And then they're back to feeling normal again.
All right. So and this leads me back to it's kind of like a double question. Will I need to get tested before I get the vaccine? And after I get the vaccine, I guess you kind of heard, I don't need to wear no mask no more. I'm going to put it like that. Do I need to, because I'm not that he was probably thinking, about this.
So yeah, those are both good questions. You don't need to get tested before you get the vaccine. It's already been tested in people who've had COVID before, and it's safe. So you don't need to get tested to see if you have COVID or you had COVID. You can just get the vaccine. The second question is, yes, we do recommend that you still wear a mask. And why is that? You yourself, after you've gotten vaccinated, are highly protected against getting COVID. Unfortunately, we don't know if you can still transmit to somebody else. So when you wear a mask, you're helping somebody else out from somebody who hasn't been vaccinated, and so that you won't transmit to them. So let me just give you a scenario. You got vaccinated, you're doing well, you got exposed to somebody, and now you have that virus in your nose, let's say, and your immune system is fighting the virus right now, and it's fighting it well enough so you're not sick, but that virus could still be possibly still there in your nose until your immune system gets rid of it. In the meantime, you could theoretically then transmit to somebody else. And let's assume you go see your parents or your grandparents who are older, and let's say they're older than 65 and they're at high risk of getting bad COVID and they haven't gotten a vaccine yet. And so because we want to be very safe, we recommend the vaccine. Now, in the future, if everybody who is at high risk were to get vaccinated, then maybe we don't have to wear a mask anymore, but we certainly aren't even close to that yet because most people still haven't gotten a vaccine.
Okay, and this is just one frequently asked question, but I know there's a certain subset of group that probably would love to know the answer to this one. Can pregnant or breastfeeding women get the COVID-19 vaccine? And can it possibly cause infertility in women?
So let me start off by saying that the vaccine has not been tested in pregnant women because that's just the way we do testing. When we start testing a product, we don't start testing it in vulnerable populations. However, because pregnant women are at high risk of getting COVID disease and dying of COVID, just like they are getting influenza and dying with influenza, they're at higher risk than somebody who's not pregnant. It has been recommended by the medical societies that treat pregnant women that they consider getting the vaccine because the risks are going to outweigh the benefits. There's very little there's no data that vaccines have harmed an infant. There's no data that vaccines have ever caused infertility or caused birth defects. And so it seems unlikely that this vaccine would do that as well. And that's why they recommend that women should go ahead, if they're pregnant, consider getting the vaccine. Note that it's still going to be the pregnant woman's decision, along with her healthcare provider, as to whether or not they think the risks outweigh the benefits outweigh the risks for them. So infertility, this virus, the virus can infect a bunch of things, and I think there's some data that it can infect a placenta, but that's the virus. And that's all the reason to get a vaccine, so you won't be able to, that way you'll fight it off and the virus will never get to the placenta. Remember that the vaccine is just a piece of the virus. It's just the spike protein, so it can't cause a lot of the ill effects that a virus can cause. And so the short answer is there's no data that it causes infertility. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't know why all of a sudden this would cause infertility when no vaccine has ever been shown to cause infertility.
Okay. And one thing I wanted to I should have did this at the beginning. Can you give people kind of like a short bio and kind of talk about some of the work you all are doing at your clinic besides this? Because I looked you up and it's very impressive what you did, especially on HIV and things like that.
Well, since 1994, I've been working on vaccines. We started off with a funding from the government to help out to try and develop an HIV vaccine. Unfortunately, we still don't have an HIV vaccine, and we're still working on it. HIV is a lot more tricky of a virus than COVID, because HIV has tens of thousands of different strains, and every one of them can cause AIDS. COVID, as you know, likely only has one or two strains now that are important for vaccines. So you can make a vaccine that will eliminate a couple of strains. We don't know how to make a vaccine yet that can eliminate tens of thousands of strains. So that's the problem with HIV. We also test a lot of other vaccines. We test hepatitis B vaccines. We tested anthrax vaccines to make that a better vaccine. We've also tested smallpox vaccines. Smallpox is obviously a huge, that's the biggest success that mankind has ever made in terms of defeating an infection, because we've eliminated smallpox from the face of the earth. Unfortunately, there's still vials of smallpox available, and people are worried that terrorists may get a hold of it and unleash it. So that's why we need to continue to have a vaccine for that in case that were to happen. And we also work on flu vaccines as well. So our research group is very interested in doing human studies, testing different types of vaccines, new vaccines. Flu vaccines, obviously we have, but they are only about 60% effective in the best of years. So we need to keep testing those to see if we can get a better vaccine. And it'll, just as an aside, it'll be interesting because we don't have an mRNA flu vaccine. It would be interesting if that would work better than what we have now. And I'm sure that companies are now working on that as well.
So what has been in your opinion, some of the myths that you've probably heard or haven't had an opportunity to kind of talk about when you kind of talk about, you've heard about the COVID-19 vaccine so far?
Well, I think, let's see, the biggest myth is that that you can get COVID infection from the vaccine. And I'm hoping that I've convinced your audience that that's not possible. It'd be like, again, the analogy is if I gave you the keys to my car and all you had was the keychain to the car, mm-hmm. that you could actually drive 70 miles an hour on the highway. You can't do that without the car. All you have is that keychain. And it's the same thing with a vaccine. All you have is the one protein of the virus, and that virus needs 30 proteins in order to cause infection. And all you have is one of them. So it's just not possible. Some of the other myths are that getting the vaccine is going to make you more sick than COVID, and that's generally related. Not that you won't get COVID, but it'll make you more sick, and that's not true. I mean, people have to remember that in general, in the general population, 10 to 20% of people who get COVID are hospitalized, and that's why we're having such huge problems with COVID. It's one of the reasons is that there's so many people that get hospitalized. Now that could change in children because not that many children get sick with COVID, but we're not vaccinating children now. We're vaccinating adults, and a lot of those adults get hospitalized and sick with it. So the side effect, yes, we do see side effects with the vaccine, but they're nothing like getting the vaccine. What else?
Well, I think I haven't talked about remdesivir. I hope I pronounced it right.
Yeah, remdesivir.
Yeah.
So now you want to talk about treatment for COVID infection.
Okay, so that's what, okay.
Yeah, so now remdesivir is a drug that actually UAB, me and my colleague, Dr. Nathan Erdman, he's more involved in this than I am, but we did those original studies back in March, April of last year to show that remdesivir actually helped in treating hospitalized patients with COVID infection. And it reduced their hospitalization stay by 4 days. So they left the hospital 4 days earlier than they normally would have. And there are other drugs that are being tested for that. We're still testing other drugs to see if they help. As you know, steroids, or you may know, steroids help some people who are hospitalized and on oxygen as well. And then monoclonal antibodies, sort of what former President Trump received with the monoclonal antibody cocktail. That helps if you give it really early. And of course, former President Trump got the monoclonal antibody extremely early because they were testing him all the time. And it probably helped him a lot. And I think Nick Saban also got that monoclonal antibody. So those things help as well. Beyond that, there's nothing. There's another drug that we found that helps a little bit called baricitinib. But anyway, beyond that, there's not much else that's been shown to help, but they're testing things, and they're continuing to test things. Another myth is that hydroxychloroquine helps. I mean, there was some promising data early on that it may help, but they weren't controlled studies, which is needed to show if they help. And there've been at least 5 controlled studies that show that it doesn't help at all. So anyway, that's what we do with science, is we test things, and we test them in a blinded fashion, meaning I don't know who got what. And neither does the patient. And then we unblind later, so people unblinded who weren't part of the study, and they determine whether or not it works or not. And that's the kind of information you need to know if something works. But what's amazing is yesterday was the first day. Yesterday, a year ago, was the day where the first patient was diagnosed in the United States with COVID. And a year later, we've got 2 vaccines, and we've got at least 4 different products that are helping to treat people with COVID. So that's pretty phenomenal within a year. That's sort of unprecedented.
Okay, and this next question I want to ask you, since I'm a person of color, what would you say to people of color that possibly may have concerns about taking the vaccine and fears?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I may not be the one to answer that because I'm not a person of color. I think you need to hear it from people of color, like my colleague, Leticia Lopre. Maybe you can talk to her sometime, but she's an infectious disease faculty member who can speak better to that. I can tell you that being involved in vaccine studies in Alabama for a long time, we discuss a lot about the Tuskegee experiment. And that is really difficult to overcome that because the scientific community kind of messed up the trust of a whole population of people of color. And it's hard to gain that back again. So as many of you probably already know, Tuskegee experiment was a study that was out of Tuskegee, Alabama, where at the time there was no treatment for syphilis. And so they thought, well, do black people react differently to syphilis than white people? Let's follow this group of black people. At the time, it was kind of innocuous because there was no treatment, or at least effective treatment. But within a couple of years, once it started, penicillin became available. That's to this day is the treatment of choice for syphilis, so highly effective. And they withheld the treatment for syphilis from 1945, when penicillin first came out, until 1972, which is just ridiculous, right? And so that is really hard to overcome that. And I think that has led to a lot of African Americans or people of color being very distrustful of any kind of vaccine or treatment that's come up. And I think what we're trying to do is we've tested this vaccine in a lot of people of color. About 10% of these individuals in these studies are African American. The study that I'm doing now with Janssen, we've enrolled in Africa and in South America. So we have, and in the United States. So we have people of color, obviously, in Africa and in South America to show that it's safe and hopefully works as well. And so I think the other thing I'll say is studies are done differently now than they were back then, in that there's a consent form now. And the consent form is a form that's not made up just by the investigator. It's made up by the community members and community representatives who understand science with the scientists, and they come up with this to inform the person to understand what they're getting into when they go into these studies. So there's a huge amount of process that's involved now, and there's a lot of safety measures that weren't involved before. And I guarantee you these vaccines are safe. I mean, I've been vaccinated now. As a healthcare worker, we were among the first getting vaccinated. Okay. And I did have some side effects. I had a sore arm and I felt kind of crappy the next day after my second dose, but it all went away, and I would highly recommend it. And I have no worries about it being a problem. But I realize that it's still an issue of trust. I think the only way it's really gonna change significantly is when other people of color get the vaccine and they tell their friends that, hey, it's no big deal, I got the vaccine. It would help if people of color who are prominent in the world also publicly get the vaccine as well. I think that would help as well, because it would show that, you know, they're fine getting the vaccine and it's safe for them. So I think those things will help. It's not going to help me much for me to say much, since I'm still a white guy trying to convince you to take the vaccine.
So I know we covered a lot. Any final thoughts you would like to add, or you looking?
No, I just do want to say that this is, I'm very excited about this vaccine. This is a tribute, a triumph in science. We've never developed a vaccine this quickly, but we've done so safely, and it's an effective vaccine. And so I do think it would be very important for everybody who can get the vaccine to be vaccinated. And it's just, I cannot understate how important it is to get this vaccine, and what a medical scientific triumph it is that we have this vaccine now.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Goepfert, for coming on today. I hope I didn't bear you down with too many questions.
No, this has been fun. I appreciate it. Thank you for your interest.
Yeah, you're more welcome to come back anytime. Anyone in your staff can come back, and, you know, especially this COVID-19 is not going anywhere anytime soon.
No, you're right.
Year 2 of this thing. So,
right.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on.
All right.
Thank you all for watching this video. Please check out what'shappeningbirmingham.com for more videos. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you all again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast. Please check out our website, app, or subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest videos today.